Horizon Forbidden West does everything you'd want from a sequel to a good, albeit flawed start to a series. With brand new tools, environments, developing characters and stories, not just those pertaining to the main character, Forbidden West raises the bar for Guerrilla Games' RPG franchise. Complete with familiar combat that you love from the first game, now mixing with a world that feels much more fun to explore both in main and side objectives, Forbidden West is a triumphant return for Aloy, even when her story stumbles along the way. Forbidden West is a true sequel to Zero Dawn, meaning those of you that skipped out on the first game will surely struggle to start with this one. I recommend going back to that first game and then continuing on here. The ending of Zero Dawn left Aloy with equally as many questions as it did answers. Having defeated the evil AI Hades, she now finds herself dealing with the ongoing effects of the first game, Earth quickly dying. In search of answers, she travels to the Forbidden West where her mentor turned foe is on his own devious mission. The two continue their back and forth throughout the adventure while also seeing a handful of returning and new faces. These side characters provided a nice change of pace for the story, but the juxtaposition with Aloy promptly showed the contrast and understanding what's going on. These characters want to help Aloy, and her standoff nature tends to get the best of her. It's understandable with just how much more she knows and understands the world's circumstances compared to everyone else. Yet, I felt like some of her conversation deliveries were a bit too one-noted at times. There are some sweet and compassionate moments with these characters, but understandably so, Aloy can feel a bit disconnected at times. On the other hand, it's all the side quests and NPCs that felt so intricately designed that I couldn't help but appreciate it. Even the smallest of quests had such care put into them, whether it was in their script, camera framing, or line delivery, that I was partially shocked to see these quests not be part of the main story. When Forbidden West manages to interweave the side stories into the main story setting while still making it feel like a realistic occurrence in this world, that's when the story truly shines. Time and time again, I found myself more engaged with the stories between the tribes and the politics of this new world, as opposed to the overarching sci-fi story that's the foundation behind the whole conflict. Cutscenes focusing on more personal stories felt better executed, especially in pacing and delivery. Meanwhile, I found a lot of the grander sci-fi elements struggle with lengthy exposition that didn't always catch my attention as much as I wish it did. Overall, Forbidden West improves upon many of the flaws in its story execution from that of Zero Dawn, while occasionally stumbling into old habits, although certainly not as often as it did before. Even though it tends to trip on its story at times, Horizon pretty much nailed most of its gameplay components in the first release, and Forbidden West is a testament to that. Sure, the introduction could be a bit better with its pacing taking a bit to open up. Nevertheless, the combat and exploration have never felt this good. Forbidden West cuts out a lot of that fat that came with Zero Dawn, and it's all the better for it. The HUD elements are streamlined to cut out any meticulous information, yet still give you the tools to access what you need in a quick motion. For example, press R3 to activate the focus mode that gives you a quick glance at items and climbable objects. Speaking of which, there's a lot more climbable areas here, still not to the extent of something like Breath of the Wild, but a great improvement from the first game. Holding an R3 longer changes the focus mode to analyze machines and humans around you, giving you details as to what they're weak against. Managing your inventory is a lot easier to access and navigate now, letting you quickly trash or sell what you need or don't need without all the menu digging. Crafting is a lot easier in the middle of a heated fight too, allowing you to quickly make element arrows as you need them against certain types of enemies. With the press of a button, you can cycle through various arrow types and other projectiles as you rush to dodge an oncoming attack. Combat in general feels a lot more robust thanks in part to just how many options Forbidden West gives you. The staple dodging, sliding, and melee attacks still feel good, but it's the enemies and their varieties that keep things feeling new, albeit a little bit obtuse at times too. You come across various types of enemies, some with apex and elemental forms that only further increase the varieties of foes you'll battle. Fighting these giant machine monsters, human enemies included, is always a blast, especially because each fight feels like an evolution of said enemy. Depending on how you take on that foe, you can break off a piece of the machine or armor that you can then use as a weapon yourself while also completely changing the moveset of said enemy. You can try to go for the weaker parts to knock them out faster, or you may want to go for the areas that drop more collectibles. There's plenty of options for combat, so much so that in the latter half of the game, it can feel a bit much. Now, having that many options isn't bad, but it does feel a bit overwhelming at times. Ultimately, I ended up gravitating towards my own kit and moveset, and just sticking to it. You earn a lot of skill points pretty quickly while going through the campaign, and while it may feel like you're becoming a bit too powerful at times, The story is quick to throw a new enemy at your way to keep things feeling balanced. Guerrilla Games has a few difficulty options as well that let you cater the challenge and difficulty of the experience to your liking. Exploring through the open world, you'll be presented with plenty of types of missions. Diving into the quest menu, you're presented with side quests, main objectives, and it's easy to filter out which types of missions you want to tackle first. It's vastly appreciated as Forbidden West has so much for you to do that by the time I completed the main story, I felt like I had barely scratched the surface. Horizon Forbidden West is one beautiful looking RPG. Guerrilla Games continues to make this series shine among the rest of the PlayStation portfolio. Across the various types of terrains, I saw lush forests, sandy beaches, snowy terrains, and so much more. I marveled at the vibrant vistas, and it was mesmerizing. Character models evoked so much more personality, especially with the non-main characters. Line delivery and the framing of shots feel like well-executed cinematic storytelling that just never got boring. While there is a lot to like with Forbidden West, it's not without its share of bugs and glitches, which feels like there's a lot more this time. I ran into a few instances of characters clipping through terrain, pop-in elements here and there, and the characters looking a bit emotionless at times. Most specifically Aloy. The console performance, on the other hand, is a much better experience. When playing on PS5, you get the option to play between either a resolution or frame rate target mode. Resolution mode runs at the native 4K resolution at a solid 30 frames per second. Meanwhile, in the frame rate mode, you'll get a checkerboard 1800p at 60 frames per second that can look a bit fuzzy at times despite the pretty high resolution. As for the base PS4 and PS4 Pro, they run at a dynamic 1080p and a dynamic 1800p checkerboard respectively, and I'm happy to report that they both run at a solid 30 frames per second. So ultimately, the last gen consoles are still a solid way to experience the sequel, even with the lower performance bar and the drawn back assets. What immediately stood out to me with Forbidden West is the immaculate performance work done by the various cast members throughout the story. Whether they were vital to the story or just one-off side characters, I truly feel like the majority of the actors brought their A game here. I think that's why I found myself so intrigued by the side content despite them not being so integral to the story at times. Ashley Birch reprises her role as Aloy and captures her stoic nature quite well. Forbidden West script is dense, and it's apparent because at just about any moment during gameplay, Aloy will just put out a line, and at times it can feel a bit unnecessary. Whether it's learning how a rock might come in handy despite being well into the game already, or Aloy exclaiming how to solve a puzzle just seconds before I'm able to do it myself. Unfortunately, you can't really lessen the amount of time she talks in the game without just straight up muting her. Despite some annoyances with the number of lines I got, I have to give credit to Birch's performance and line delivery. It's hard to really capture tones across an open world game where you have such a dense script. You have to deliver lines in a way that can generally fit most situations, and that's certainly applicable here. At times it works, and other times it can feel a bit too stoic when scenes beg to be more somber or have some more intimacy. Outside of the performance work, Forbidden West has a lovely soundtrack backing it up. I didn't expect to be so moved by the opening credits leading up to the game's title screen. Its somber lyrics felt somewhat comforting in what is a scary and dangerous adventure. Contrasting it are some great tracks like Riddles in the Ruins and Echoes of You that encapsulate Aloy's perilous journey. Horizon Forbidden West is a worthy successor to the critically acclaimed 2017 Zero Dawn. It looks at all the criticism from the first game, actively tries to right those wrongs, and even when it does stumble in similar issues at times, it never outshines the progress made. Combat and world exploration are the best they've ever been, but I do wish the story was as well refined. I found myself wishing that Aloy was a more likable protagonist at times, showing a bit more emotion in scenes. Story composition also felt a bit cumbersome, especially with the slow introduction leading up to the embassy point. The campaign can find itself focusing a bit too much on exposition at times, especially with the sci-fi elements. Nevertheless, Forbidden West elevates the series despite its flaws and is one of the strongest reasons to get a PS5 at the moment.